So even though not all the class has returned yet, we're going to begin, and we did find one of these references. You know, the whole theme is the monadic ray ends up being very important, more important down here in these worlds than we usually think. And by looking at how things go, the master can oftentimes tell what may be your monadic ray. But this thing from Cosmic Fire here, where it says, first, according to the ray of the monad, so will the petals unfold. For instance, if the ray of the monad is the second ray, the knowledge petal will be the first to open, but the second petal of love will almost parallel its development, being for that particular type of ego. And by the way, take a look here at how the word ego and monad is equivalent. This is one of those really interesting references, because normally the word ego is not used to relate to the monad, but in this particular case it is. So being for that particular type of ego the line of least resistance, easiest unfoldment, the knowledge petal will be for it the most difficult to open. So this is on page 546 of Cosmic Fire. And every one of the monads has a different geometrical progression in the activation of the triangles. The activation of the triangles is not consistent for everybody. It is something that operates on the basis of the geometry that is induced by the monadic ray itself. So for the first ray type, monad love is most difficult. For the second ray type, knowledge is most difficult, so there's only one left, okay? For the third ray type that can always escape anything, will is most difficult, if you look at it the other way. And that is actually, that's precisely the progression that the fusion formulas take. In other words, the first ray soul gets second ray results, illumination. The second ray soul in fusion gets third ray results, imagination. The third ray type of soul gets first ray results, which is empowerment. So if you study the fusion formulas for the soul according to the soul ray, you'll see 1 moves to 2, 2 moves to 3, 3 moves to 1. Now you compare this, what's most difficult for these types. For the ray 1 monad, love is most difficult. For the ray 2 monad, knowledge is most difficult. And for the ray 3 monad, we're going to assume it will follow in the same direction, that standing steadily without moving about from point to point, holding with will is most difficult. So I'm relating these both to the soul ray and to the monadic ray. And what I'm saying, all this is a bit of a digression, of course, but then, well, I sometimes think my whole life is like a digression. And certainly my teaching style, this is digression. Occasionally we can stick to the point. What I'm saying is that there are triangles in the etheric body, and when you look at a triangle, every one of those triangles has a first, second, or third ray point in it. According to the monadic ray, there will be a tendency of one of those points to receive more juice than another point, and one of the points to receive less. So if you're looking at, I don't know what kind of example we can use. Let's just say we're looking at the energy below the diaphragm, and we've got the base of the spine, sacral center, and solar plexus. The base of the spine is the correspondence to the first ray, the sacral center corresponding to the third ray, the solar plexus to the second ray. For the first ray monad, then, although in a way for all of them, because there's the generic progress for everybody regardless, and then there's the specific progress. So let's just say generic progress, general progress is operating, sacral center comes first. But in general, the first ray monad will have an easier time activating the base of the spine than any of the other two monadic rays, and the first ray monad will have a harder time activating the solar plexus than any of the other two types of monadic rays. We are told the first ray hates and despises emotion, but sometimes has to be put into an emotional stage in order for further progress to take place. So you see, actually, that is backed up by the idea that the first ray type is always holding the lid on emotion. It means that in the lower triangle, the solar plexus would progress less rapidly for the first ray monadic type, and more rapidly, of course, for the second ray monadic type, and even the third ray, 2 times 3 is 6, has a connection with the solar plexus also. So, take any triangle, identify its first, second, and third ray components, and then you can tell something about the likely speed of unfoldment or the progression of the points in relation to that triangle. Eventually, all the points will have to be reasonably filled out, but there will be a difference according to the monadic ray. Obviously, it's just really obvious that let's take head, heart, and throat. The third ray monads have the easiest time unfolding the throat. Maybe second ray monads a harder time. Maybe first ray monads have the easiest time unfolding the head center. Maybe third ray monads will have a more difficult time unfolding the head center. I'm just using the analogy, the 3 lowest centers, the 3 highest centers. He does actually say the monad anchors itself in head, heart, or throat. Third ray monads tend to anchor in the throat, second ray monads in the heart, first ray monads in the head. So that's just some general principles there about the speed of progression of the unfoldment of the different parts of a triangle. And I think it's very interesting. And, DK can tell what that's all about because he just has to look at you and he can, tell your monadic ray and how things are unfolding. But we are in a slightly disadvantaged position and we cannot yet do that. But we will be able to do that. I find it, really, really fascinating, this whole idea of the development of the energy system according to geometry and according to the ray. It's really quite a subject. But, he's just given us little pieces, and we have to put those pieces together by inference and by analogy and so forth. When I think about the number of things for which he's just given us little pieces, and he expects that somehow if we consult our intuition and our reasoning power, we may be able to take it further, I've seen all kinds of future papers emerging in the esoteric schools of the next several centuries based on little hints that I've picked up that he's just dropped in the book. And it always works out this way. He says, you can work out the rest for yourself. See? And that's going to be, you can work out the rest for yourself is going to be the thesis of the students of the coming schools. Right now in the Moria Federation, we don't quite have time for that, but the day will come when there's more leisure. Yeah, did you have a question? Yes. Yes. Okay. Okay. Yes. Mm. Yes, interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And there's a place in several places in DK, especially in Esoteric Psychology 1 and also in the Raised Initiations, he drops a little hint about the use of esoteric numerology. Just enough. This is one of those places where he just gives you a little bit and it gets you started in considering the numerological value of the words. So, he says that numerology as it's oftentimes practiced, just the way astrology as it's oftentimes practiced, is certainly not the whole thing. So he tries to give us the key to esoteric numerology and the key to esoteric astrology. He takes the word Shambhala apart. You've seen that. And he takes it apart according to the value of the letters, and he shows how much first ray is in the word Shambhala itself. So he analyzes every letter of a word to show which divine aspects are there as well. So yeah, that, there is a numerological key to the secret doctrine, absolutely. And one just has to put that together. How many of you have read John Burgess's a numerological analysis of the Great Invocation? No one? Okay, you have. What's that book called? What's the name of it? He passed on now, but there was a lot of work that he did. Really, a very close analysis of every word and phrase in the Great Invocation, and he came up, I think, with some incredible realizations. So it is an open door. It is an open door, and I know people like yourself, Lawson Bracewell, others. They always test out the numerological value of the main concepts that they're dealing with, because it gives insight. Yeah, it's good. Well, John Burgess is his name, Berges, but I forget the name of his book. And his book is an important book. He uses the standard form of the Great Invocation. Many people try to modify the Great Invocation, and even the Tibetan was not entirely against that. He did say, that sometimes you can use the word master instead of masters. It depends on who you're trying to reach. But and then there's the whole thing about man and all that. And I'm just a traditionalist in that respect. I just stick to what I'm given. And when you see how Burgess analyzed this thing, he makes a very good case for sticking to what we're given. It's a brilliant book. So maybe all we have to do is look it up on the internet. John Burgess. What is it? Yeah, what's the name? Just the Great Invocation? That's all? The Great Invocation? Well, that's what he does. He spends the whole book numerically analyzing the Great Invocation. All right, we have to go on. We have a lot to do here. So once alignment has been achieved, it will be realized, remembering the symbolism of the head, the light, and the central opening, that many occasions rise when, in meditation, behind the group there stands the door, and before them opens out the way. So that is a kind of meditative experience that many of us can already experience. This is a lower correspondence of the higher initiate experience, and then we got dealing with the question of where are these various doors. And I would recommend, well, we'll get there eventually, but Rule 10 deals with these dark nights of the soul in all their correspondences that face you before various initiations. And I can't go looking for it right now, but even before the 6th initiation, there's a huge dark experience. Before the 4th initiation, 3rd initiation, I can't remember whether there are 4 of them. And they're always a period of darkness and not knowing before the great revelation opens up before you. Anyway, this is the lower correspondence of the higher initiate experience, right? All right. I'm afraid we get on all these interesting things, and then we won't finish during the day. Let me just see how far we have to go. Oh, okay, wait a second. Oh, not bad. This is a short one. We're going to be fine. There will be no problem. We ought to be able to knock off the first initiation this afternoon. Okay. Again, this time, in relation to the soul, this is different, comes the repetition of the discovery of the door, its use, and its appearance. I just want to say, every initiation is taken in the causal body. But initiates of the 1st and 2nd degree do not have free and conscious entrance to the causal body except at initiation and when they die. The third degree initiate should be able to freely enter the causal body at will. And that's the difference. Even though the causal body is the chamber of initiation for everybody, there is no customary free entrance into the causal body except at certain moments, such as the moment of initiation itself, and then you forget all about it, right? That's what happens. For the first couple of initiations, you may forget everything that has ever happened. In general, it is suggested that the third initiation is remembered. Although I think that in the case of Roberto Assagioli, who was, I do believe, an initiate of the third degree, DK even had to remind him of an interview that he had had with Master Kutumi, his master. DK filled in the whole thing for him just as it had taken place, as if he had been there, as if DK had been there. Assagioli was there and had forgotten it, or at least had forgotten all the details. So even though it is said that the third initiation is one that is likely to be remembered, it may not always be the case. It much depends on just the, your personality and the sensitivity of your vehicle and all of that, the brain cells and all of that. Again, this time in relation to the soul comes the repetition of the discovery of the door, its use and its appearance. Finally, behind the initiate. And of course, when it's behind you, it means it's something you've done. It is something that you no longer, the requirements are part of you. You don't have to be struggling with it. Now you can turn your attention, you've reached a new plateau, you can turn your attention to other things. This time, the door must be found upon the mental plane. Well, I guess I got ahead of myself. I hadn't read this, but it just made sense that the first door was the etheric and this is mental. So indeed, he does confirm what we said earlier. This time, the door must be found upon the mental plane and not as earlier. Excuse me. Not as earlier upon the etheric plane. This is brought about by the aid of the soul and of the lower mind, and through the revealing power of the clear, cold light of the reason. Now, is he talking about the intuition here? The clear, cold light of reason? It's a little different formulation. Or is he talking about the capacity to reason? Usually, if he means revealing power, it is the intuition itself. So the soul is involved in finding the door. The lower mind is involved, and also the intuition is involved. It sounds like we're dealing here very much with the powers of Mercury and the powers of Venus. When discovered, and here is, this is what Anne was saying a little earlier today. When discovered, the revelation of a terrible though beautiful experiment faces the initiate. These are very interesting words, aren't they? When you discover this door, and that the door is behind you, really, there is something that is perhaps frightening, because in another place he uses the word horror, which means an extreme form of fright, and yet inevitability. So here he says, you face the higher way of evolution, there is a revelation, and ahead of you lies an experiment which is terrible and beautiful. Sounds rather fourth ray, doesn't it? You're kind of heading for the fourth ray anyway, for the fourth initiation after this point. And fourth ray people have a way of exaggerating things, exaggerating the extremes. So here we have terror and beauty together. I'm I'm sorry. Pluto. Okay. Yes, okay. The extremes in Scorpio involved with Pluto and Scorpio, of course, being a fourth ray sign. And while the peculiar testing potency of Scorpio may be exhausted after the first three initiations, I wouldn't at all be surprised to find Scorpio involved in the fourth initiation. In other words, it has a particular application in the first three initiations, but a different approach, namely helping to destroy the causal body in the fourth initiation. That's what I think. So terrible and beautiful. Okay, do you want to go on this terrible, beautiful experience, experiment, adventure? What do you think? I mean, sounds like a lot of fun, right? Okay. It's inevitable. It's coming along, but only when we have earned it, DK says, you just can't take the fourth initiation because you want to. You have to earn the right for that type of sacrifice. Now, usually you think, well, why do you have to earn a right for sacrifice? I mean, sacrifice is something you don't want, so why do you have to earn it? But in the perspective of occultism, the right must be earned. He finds that this time, alignment is not his need, but the definite undertaking of a creative work. The urge to the creative life, this sounds right for the stage we're talking about. The building of a bridge between the door which lies behind and the door which lies ahead. Now, which doors do we think these are? Obviously, there is another initiation coming, isn't there? There's another door. The fourth degree is coming, right? But I wonder if he means something even more here. We have to build a bridge. This is fourth ray terminology, isn't it? You know what I think? The fifth ray was very needed at what initiation? Of course, it's needed in all of them, but it's the third degree. Okay. Seventh ray first, sixth ray second, fifth ray third. I think that as soon as the second initiation is over, you begin to use the fifth ray in order to approach the third initiation, where it is tried and tested out and expressed in a higher way. The analogy obviously would be that when the third degree is over, you begin to use the fourth ray, bridging towards the fourth initiation, and he's using all of the language of the fourth ray. Undertaking a piece of creative work, the fourth law or the fourth method of establishing soul control is the urge to the creative life. So the word creativity, it goes with the third ray, yes, but especially with the fourth ray, part of the third ray. Creative work is being undertaken. Bridge building is undertaken. In other words, you're starting to use the fourth ray towards the time when it will be fully expressed in Buddhic harmony at the time of the fourth initiation. So, this involves the construction of what is technically the Antakarana, the rainbow bridge. Of course, there's the fourth ray symbolism. We have been constructing the rainbow bridge all along following the second initiation. I don't think there's so much use in trying to build the rainbow bridge, at least the part of it we concentrate upon, until after or around the second initiation. The first part of the rainbow bridge, which connects the mental unit with the egoic lotus, there you can build around the time of the first degree. But when it comes to the second part, or at least the vertical part that we've been studying, you've seen the diagrams. There's a triple rainbow bridge. The triple rainbow bridge, this is very big. The triple rainbow bridge is found here, and it is this part I'm talking about. This is the part that probably cannot really be built until the second degree is at least, within sight. This part you can build from the first degree. This part is interesting, and it seems to me to connect more with the third degree. But this is a very incomplete antikarana. The antikarana continues to the Buddhic plane, continues to the atmic plane, and it is at the atmic level of mastership that, in a sense, Mercury becomes the sun. Mercury and the sun are one, and the antikarana is withdrawn into the sun temporarily. So probably at the fifth degree, what we call the human stage of the antikarana is no longer needed. Later again, it will be regenerated when we have to make the next bridge toward the next higher possible extension. There's an antikarana from Earth to Venus, and probably from Venus to the Sun, and from every planet to the Sun eventually. Okay, now we have to build the bridge. The door must be found upon the mental plane. We're taking the third initiation here. A terrible but beautiful experiment faces the initiate. Now creative work has to be undertaken, and it's probably a new phase of the creative work, which extends the antikarana from a practical way of speaking all the way to the Buddhic permanent atom and the Buddhic vehicle. Do you always have a Buddhic vehicle? You always have a Buddhic permanent atom, right? You always have an atmic permanent atom. Do you always have a Buddhic vehicle? It's a difficult question. He says, basically he tells us that the planet Neptune is involved with the coordination of the Buddhic vehicle, and he hints at this, that it happens after the third initiation. There's also one reference where he seems to suggest that it begins to happen somewhere between the second and third initiation, but after the third initiation there's a couple of references, the coordination of the Buddhic vehicle. So this means that around the Buddhic permanent atom, an intuitive vehicle is either built, or if it already exists, it is coordinated so that it can really function. So this is part of the bridging work that happens after the third degree. We've already been involved in creating the antikarana. I guess it becomes even more intuitive and powerful after the third degree. And it still exists. You know, as you are working towards the fourth degree, you are still very much in your body. You have a body. Because generally, initiations have to be taken with the physical brain. Not always. He does tell how it's possible sometimes to take the normal initiations outside of incarnation. But mostly, we need the physical brain to do so. So we are talking about the construction of the rainbow bridge, and even when I read the word rainbow, I think about the fourth ray. They love color. All the colors are somehow synthesized by the fourth ray on the Buddhic plane, the plane of harmony. This is built by the disciple in training, who, by the way, is not yet an initiate. So he keeps on switching his focus here. The focus sometimes is after the third degree and sometimes before. He's bouncing back and forth. This is built by the disciple in training upon the basis of his past experience. It is anchored in the past, which is the mental unit in a way, and firmly grounded in the highest, rightly oriented aspect of the personality. The mind is the rightly oriented aspect of the personality, which gives us the platform upon which to build the antikarana. And if we study the antikarana building, there comes a time when we breathe in all the lower forces of the lower parts of the personality to rise up and support the point of tension in the mental unit from which we are building the antikarana. Now, is that necessary? Just think about your own life. What happens if your body and your emotions are not in a condition to do mental work? You, you just can't do it, can you? I'm too tired to think. Oh, I'm so upset I can't think. Those kinds of things. These forces have to be lifted up and reoriented and come to the support of the mental unit from which we build our antakarana. So everything from the bottom has to support this bridge building effort. Of course, I go up, but it could be in, up and in. It's just vibrational. That's what's really happening. We, in our imagination, we think up, we think in, whatever, and that helps the vibration occur, but that's not a real description of what's happening. DK says all of the various images, they don't even exist really. They are not, all of these props in occultism are just methods. They are not descriptive of reality. Okay, so we are building, we the disciple in training, upon the basis of our past experience. It's anchored in what we've built, and it's firmly grounded in the highest part of the personality, which is the mind. As the disciple then creatively works, he finds that there is a reciprocal action on the part of the presence, the monad, the unity which stands behind the door. By the way, how many of you have ever, it's the old Jesuit practice, how many of you have ever practiced the technique of the presence, it's called the practice of the presence of God. In other words, you just imagine that God is present all the time. Have you ever done that? For a few minutes anyway? I mean, it's very tough. It's a tough practice, because if you have God present all the time, you better behave, So what I want to interpret this from an occult perspective. When you're practicing the presence of God, and of course the six-ray types, they wouldn't speak in this language, the religious people, but you're really practicing the presence of your monad. That's really what you're doing. The monad and the presence are the same thing. So when you practice the presence, it is in fact an invocation of the presence of the monad into your conscious life. So as you can see, it is a pretty advanced technique. I would suggest we try that sometime. It is most interesting. It has a very powerful effect on what the personality does or does not do when you practice the presence. And all you do is you imagine it. That's all. You just let's do that. Let's just take a minute out, and we'll practice the presence. Okay? Let's just get into the meditative attitude here for just a moment. I promise myself that instead of reading everything, occasionally I'll take a little break for a tiny little meditation here and there, just to make sure you're with me. Okay. All right. So this is in your own way. All it is whatever the presence means to you. This something that is always here, and it's never absent, it's always present. It pervades all things. It underlies all things. And in fact, it is all things. We just imagine that this formless something is really here. And now hold that, and because probably you've meditated with your eyes closed, but open your eyes and keep the presence. Open your eyes and sustain the presence. And look around and realize that everything you see is in the presence, is pervaded by the presence, and actually is the presence. And I suggest to us that a simple little exercise like this is one of the ways of walking towards monadic realization. If the presence and the monad are the same, which he says, that the practice of the presence is the practice of the presence of the monad. So we sometimes ask, how do I gain monadic awareness? How do I understand pure being? How do I see from the perspective of that part of me that is the monad? And I suggest one of the useful things is this little exercise. And of course, it has profound effects. You know, the people who are really serious, let's say on the sixth ray line, about their spiritual training, they use it as kind of a monitor for their conscience. It's like, it's as if you're under the all-seeing eye at all times. See, they take the second aspect of it, vision, and they say, the presence of God is here, and God sees everything I think, feel, do. So it's like the all-seeing eye. You're practicing the presence of the all-seeing eye. And then, of course, we all have to adjust our behavior according to the eye. So that's one way of doing it, but the other way is simply to feel the pure being of all contents of consciousness. See, whatever you see, whatever you touch, whatever you experience, it is simply what's called a content of consciousness. A COC. Every time I write COC on my computer, it spells out content of consciousness. So these contents of consciousness may appear to be separate from each other, which is the consciousness of the ordinary person, or the contents of consciousness may appear unified. If they appear unified, then your soul is at work. You are seeing from the perspective of soul. Unification. If you're, see, separate contents of consciousness, personality consciousness. Unified contents of consciousness, soul consciousness. If you open your eyes, so to speak, and all the contents of consciousness that you perceive appear to be the same thing, then you are employing monadic consciousness of a kind. I'm not saying the full thing, but that's how it is. In other words, blotting out all form, hiding all difference, blotting out all form. So it's a simple little practice, is when you see what you see, what is the factor of, what is the degree of unity in your perceptions, and what is the degree of sameness in your perceptions. If you can see sameness, no matter in the face of apparent difference, the monad is already intruding into the normal consciousness. You understand what I'm saying? Does it make sense? It just has to be tried. It's a good practice. Anyway, as the disciple then creatively works, he finds that there is a reciprocal action on the part of the presence, the monad, the unity which stands at the door. On this door, everything is in pieces. When you inside the door, everything is unified in your perception. So that's one of the ways of knowing whether we are on this side of the door or the other side of the door. Yes. Okay, I lost the last word. For each door. I will say this, that beyond a certain point, well, it is, but I want to be specific about it. The factor of sameness intensifies beyond the door of the third degree. The factor of sameness is triumphant at the sixth degree. The degree of realized unity is confirmed at the third degree. See, you know, in our teaching, we study unity and we study synthesis. Unity is of the second ray, basically, although, you know, DK mixes the terms. Unity is of the second ray, synthesis is of the first ray. Synthesis is, in a way, the second ray aspect of the first ray. Here is well, it is very important to discriminate between unity and synthesis. And basically, I'll kind of give you a paraphrase here. It's pretty close. Unity has to be created. Synthesis is. Or the other way around. Synthesis is, unity must be created. So we work at creating right human relations in the world of becoming so that we can achieve the harmony which already exists on the Buddhic plane. In the higher worlds, unity does exist, but in the lower worlds, it doesn't. And we create unity. You know, like there's this big unity church. What are they talking about? The whole thing for them is unity. And they seek to have harmonious relations with all groups and peoples and cultures, and it's building lines of harmonious relationship, of mutual respect, where everyone is helping everybody else. But in unity, all the different parts and pieces still exist as apparently different things. They are beautifully, lovingly, harmoniously related, but they are different things that are well related. That's unity. All the different contents of consciousness, your perceptions, are related to your other perceptions in a harmonious manner. And they're all magnetically attracted to each other so that they all enhance each other. Uh-oh, something just happened. Someone just... hold on.
Oh, it's me.
Okay, dear, you're quite audible. Okay, just be careful. My wife just came on. It's just that she doesn't know how audible she really is. Okay, I'll have to turn off your volume, Tuya, and then we won't get the echo. Okay, speaking of unity, all right.
I am muted already. I'm muted.
Very good. Okay, very good. Thank you. I knew something had happened. All right, anyway, unity, you unite with something else. But it's still something else in your consciousness. It's not the same. When it comes to synthesis, quality disappears, and it all becomes white light. All the different qualities, they can clash with each other, they can fight with each other, they can harmonize with each other. You've got a bunch of different notes. Notes are qualities. When they're unified, you have harmony. When colors are unified, you have color harmony. But still, the qualities exist. Now, to synthetic perception, all qualities are the same. They simply share the factor of being. They are one thing. That is synthesis. Now, this does not make a person impractical. In other words, you can be in the synthetic state of mind, and you can realize that all things are the same thing, absolutely the same thing, and you can still, with your lower principles, you can still deal with the illusion that they are not the same thing. In other words, the master is a very practical person. He knows all things are the same thing, but he can still deal with things as if they were different. But the person who is less than synthetic in their consciousness still sees everything as different and has not yet mastered the realization that all things are the same thing. And that's the best I can do in describing the difference between unity and synthesis. Yes? That's it. The same thing. Sameness. Sameness and synthesis are the same. In other words, when the day comes that I can look in all directions and see no difference, then I have synthesis, or I am synthesis. Harmlessness, I've become fascinated by DK's definition. He has many definitions, but he says, harmlessness is the life expression of the man who realizes himself to be everywhere. I'm sorry? I really can't hear. I'll show it to you. It'll be easier. Okay. I'm going to go get my hearing aids. My hearing aids are going to be turned up rapidly. And then I'm going to do better than that, because the sentence is only one part of the whole thing. It's not enough. This is not good. Okay. Harmlessness everywhere. Here it is. Harmlessness is the expression of the life of the man who realizes himself to be everywhere, who lives consciously as a soul, whose nature is love, whose method is inclusiveness, and now here's the point, and to whom all forms are alike, the same, alike, in that they veil and hide the light and are but externalizations of the one infinite being. So this is an elevation. This is in Treatise on White Magic, page 102, 103. This is an elevation of the definition of harmlessness to a really metaphysical position, a cosmic justification for harmlessness. This is what it is. Let the group know there are no other selves. Let the group know there is no color, only light. And then let darkness take the place of light, hiding all difference, blotting out all form. So in Rule 9, we have the great statement of synthesis, hiding all difference, blotting out all form. So and we talked about that on the very first day, how when the blazing light of the monad comes down the antakarana, up, down, the impression of essential being is so strong that it obliterates all actions and reactions of time and space. And without time and without space, you don't have difference. So there comes a point in our work when we have to look in all directions at the same time and realize that although the senses reveal difference and the mind confirms it, it's not true. It's an illusion. There is no difference. And this seems like a contradiction, of course, because obviously everything is different from everything else. But there's this thing that happens inside the consciousness, which is the presence of essential being, which hides all difference. It blots it out. Also, if you go back to Rule 5, you'll find something quite similar. Let the group perceive the triad shining forth. And here it says, dimming the light of the soul, and, first step, blotting out the light of form. The macrocosmic whole is all there is. The macrocosmic whole is all there is. Let the group perceive that whole, and then no longer use the thought, my soul and thine. So that's a unification. It's on the way to blotting out all form. You get a big expression of high soul nature in Rule 5, and you get an expression of synthesis in Rule 9. And even in the definition of harmlessness, he looks at all the forms and he says they're all alike. They're just externalizations of one being. So these are fundamental realizations which are occurring when we start to bring all things together, first into a unity and then into a realized sameness. And again, it doesn't mean you're not practical. You can still deal with illusion. And I would say that when DK starts to educate us using the Antakarana, and he sends our consciousness into the spiritual triad towards the monad, he is trying to educate us in unity and in synthesis. And, you know, look at the world today. Everybody's killing everybody, right? It's a bloody Mars-Pluto mess. The farthest thing from the fighting forces is harmlessness. Their great opinion is if they can just get rid of you, they will be happy, and vice versa. And so they do not realize themselves to be everywhere. They are not living consciously as a soul. Their method is not inclusiveness, and for sure, all forms are not alike. So this education in unity first and synthesis later is so needed to reduce the chaos of the world. And of course, with the coming of Christ, this is exactly what we will get. Because probably, well, he's the most harmless, dynamically harmless member of the human race. And we will be educated in this way. And, you know, DK has nothing but praise for the concept of harmlessness and how dynamically effective it is in just changing lives, spiritualizing them like no other discipline can do. And so I'm so happy in a way to have found or refound this philosophical justification for harmlessness, because it takes it right into the cosmic world. You know, it's not just being nice to each other, right? He says superficial outer disturbance can happen when you are harmless and all the rest of it. This is the real reason for harmlessness. It's because of the underlying brotherhood, which is monadic, and the other underlying synthesis, which is monadic. This is the real reason for harmlessness. So the disciple is working using the Antakarana, and as he creatively works, he finds that there is a reciprocal action on the part of the presence, the monad, the unity which stands behind the door. In other words, if you call to God, God will answer. Everybody knows that. if you pray, there's an answer. What is it? Ask and you shall receive. ASK, ask, pray, ask. Ask and you shall receive. Knock and it shall be opened unto you. Seek and ye shall find. And it all totals up to the word ask. And an ask is an invocation, and there will be an answer. So he discovers that one span of the bridge, if I might so call it, he's just speaking in symbols, of course, is being built or pushed forward from the other side of the gulf, separating him from the experience in the life of the spiritual triad. In other words, on the other side, your bridge-building efforts are being met by the bridge-building efforts of the triad, the monad, God, the higher sources, whatever you want to call it. That's called evocation. You have invoked, you have sent up the projection, you have asked, you have demanded, and now comes the answer from the higher sources of power, love, and illumination. Okay, well that may be, and I'm not talking about a petition where you say, please give me this. This is not a personal ask. This is a soul-infused invocation. Think about it. Who builds the antakarana? The personality? No. The personality, with all of its lower desires and, requests, does not build the antakarana. The personality might pray to its own soul for a response, and of course, as you say, the soul is a karmic lord, and you cannot be given everything, but you will be given something. What's the old saying? You may not get what you want, but you'll get what you need. And of course, what you need is not always what, doesn't look like what you want. But who builds the antakarana? Who? Only the soul-infused personality builds the antakarana. So that's why when you are achieving the stage of tension and you've drawn up all the personality powers to support your position at a point of tension on the mental plane, before you can really project into the higher worlds via the imagination, you have to call in the will aspect of the soul, the presence of the soul in its will aspect, to infuse the personality mind at a point of tension before it can project. Meaning, unless you are a reasonably soul-infused personality, such as you find at the second degree, there is no building the antakarana, because it takes soul force supporting the mental point of tension in order to create the projection, which is a demand, into the higher worlds. And so what's the soul-infused personality going to ask for? It's really appealing to the world of light, to the world of power, to the world of understanding and of wisdom. And these things are allowed. Of course, from the other side of the bridge, they're not going to just turn the fire hose of divine fire on you, in other words, you ask for something, and they have such a sense of proportion that the response will be in relation to the quality of the demand. You can't ask for wisdom and have the knowledge of the planetary logos dumped on you. That's not going to happen. There will be, in other words, proportional response. And of course, the factor of karma will come into play. But it is inevitably true, ask and you shall receive. That is true. It doesn't say what you will receive, but you will receive. And it's the faith in that that allows simple people to just pray for help, and they will get help. In other words, the higher power is never deaf, never. And the people who are in the AA program, you know, some of them are just waking up, whatever, Alcoholics Anonymous, waking up. They communicate with the higher power just out of faith. There is a proportional response. I have experience with this, and I know you do too, that there is a response. Anyway, he discovers that one span of the bridge is being built or pushed. This is interesting. First ray, pushed forward from the other side of the gulf. He's speaking in dualistic language, which is just symbolic, separating him from the experience in the life of the spiritual triad. This spiritual triad is essentially to the initiate what the threefold personality is to the man in physical incarnation. And that is quite a statement. Because there's a huge implication in this statement. Can you see it? The man in physical incarnation has a threefold personality. And the man is greater than the threefold personality. The soul in incarnation is a threefold personality. The spiritual triad is essentially to the initiate what the threefold personality is to the man. Who then is the initiate? Remember, an initiate is exactly. The initiate is the monad. The initiate is not made. He already exists. It is just bringing the initiate consciousness into the lower vehicles where it does not yet exist, which makes us think that the initiate is made. The initiate pre-exists initiation. Initiation is the descent of the powers of the monad into the lower fields of awareness, replicating itself in the lower fields. So this is a real mind bender. This, I wish I could, if I could find the, I'm not sure whether I can find it, but, okay, initiate, result. No, initiate, let's see. Initiate is the result, initiate is the, well, anyway, I'm not going to look through 76 references. Okay. But the whole idea is the initiate, we are already the initiate. That's what exists here. But we are not the initiate in demonstration in the lower worlds. That we are not yet, even though we are the initiate. Now, we're coming to the point where it will be necessary again to eat. Although sometimes I think, a person could live on this stuff. The computer may want to eat too. It may protest. When my computer starts going like this, I know it's time for one of those spring cleanings. Look at that, will you? Gosh. Okay. I'm just going to finish this because we're going to do, we're going to all take the first initiation after lunch. I wonder if I have succeeded in giving you at least a general idea of the possibilities lying ahead of the disciple and incited you to definite conscious response to those possibilities. Do you ever get the sense that DK is trying to inspire us and to arouse us so that we actually do something in our lives? I cannot do other than speak in terms of consciousness, even though the life of the triad, leading in its turn to identification with the monad, I like that, as the personality life leads eventually to soul control and expression, has naught to do with consciousness or sensitivity as those terms are commonly understood. Now, we can say, oh, well, I'm beyond consciousness. People can say that based on the fact that DK says, well, beyond the third degree, you're not working on consciousness anymore, you're working on life identification. But he puts in the qualifier here that the life of the monad or of the triad has nothing to do with consciousness or sensitivity as those terms are commonly understood. So what we want to know is how those terms are uncommonly understood. Because if even the planetary logos has consciousness, and so does the solar logos, you can bet that we are not finished with consciousness when we reach the third degree. Yet remember how, in all my teachings upon occult unfoldment, I have used the word identification. This is the big word. This is the only word I have found which can in any way convey the complete unity which is finally achieved by those who develop a sense of unity and who refuse to accept isolation. Now, do you see what he's just done here? He's put two words in a sentence which should immediately awaken a trigger in your consciousness. And what would that trigger bring forward? What indication is given here? In this one sentence, you have two words which point towards a state of identification. And what is that state by another name? I'll read it again. Well, the wording here is that this is the only word I can find which will point to a state of complete unity, which is finally achieved by those who develop a sense of unity and refuse to accept isolation. Now, you know, an association, a mercurial association should pop here and point out to you that he's just hinted at the state of isolated unity. You see what I'm saying? He has just included isolation and unity in the same sentence, and isolated unity is exactly that state which shows you identification. It is achieved by the master. He talks about isolated unity, isolated individuality, isolated identity. Three states. Isolated unity is the highest, and you are able to isolate the unity instead of remaining isolated out of the unity. So he's now playing with this concept of a great state which we all have to achieve when we use the first ray fusion formula called isolated unity. You remember that from Esoteric Psychology 2? Isolated unity, inclusive reason, presented attributes. Those are advanced soul themes that we are to meditate upon depending upon our soul ray. If it's the first ray, we use isolated unity, which is a profound state of identification with the whole. Okay, separateness then fades out entirely and the great heresy of separateness is ended. And here it is, the isolated unity, and he comes right in with the word, the isolated unity achieved is unity with the whole, with being in its totality, and then with this cheerful little thought, and this cannot as yet convey much to you. But what I'm hoping is that it can convey increasingly much to us, because he's hinting at it all the time. He's trying to lead us into this state of isolated unity. If you look here at the words, I'm going to give you the three: isolated individuality. No, I can't even find it. Isolated identity. I'll do that. Isolated identity. And here, here's the description. There is an esoteric repetition of the physical process of becoming a separated individual. Between the state of isolated individuality and isolated unity lies one to which is given the name isolated identity. So isolated individuality is individualization. Isolated identity has to do with the disciple. Let him say it. It is this stage we are concerned with we are concerned, and its esoteric implications. Isolated unity describes the stage the master has reached. Isolated individuality is that of the disciple. Isolated identity with the soul is that of the disciple up to and including the third initiation. This is a very important little section, page 717 of Discipleship in the New Age, Volume 1. So scattered throughout the books are all the things we need. When pieced together, they will give us the pattern by which we must proceed as we expand our consciousness and deepen our identification with life. Okay, are there any questions? Because we are at that point when the bell is tolling, you know. Don't they ring the bell before every meal? Maybe not before every meal? I wonder if that's what they meant. Never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for you, tolls for thee, meaning you got to go to lunch. Okay, so actually we finished that. So we'll be able to concentrate on the first initiation after lunch and perhaps achieve it by dinner. Well, you know, don't laugh, because it says that the Christ retakes the first initiation with every new candidate to whom he administers the initiation. So the Christ retakes the first every time he gives the first initiation. Okay, well, enjoy your lunch, and let's come back at 5 minutes to 2. Yes, you can go. Okay, it's all right. Okay. And meanwhile, Giselle, I have to, you know, I don't want to send you off without the first initiation. Yeah, no, I am worried. I'm worried. I'm worried. All right. Now, someone has to find Eric and synthesize everything that just went on in the last hour for him. Who wants to volunteer? It'll be easy, you know, just say it's all about identification and isolated unity, and that's it. The name of John's book is Sacred Vessel of the Mysteries, John Burgess. Okay, the Great Invocation, Word and Power. Word as power. Word of power. Word of power. Gift of love. I'm so sorry. I hardly hear a thing, but yes, he's I guess it's really his great work, you know. If you think about his life, this is what it all led to this. Okay, friends. So there are some of us here still, and we'll be back after lunch. We're into some interesting things here. We've just dealt with the fourth and fifth sentences of Rule 1. Behind the group there stands the door, before them opens out the way, discussing the way of higher evolution, the idea of the door of initiation, and also the indigo disc in the head as a kind of doorway. We've been discussing one day after another each of these particular sentences with their vast implications. Really revolutionary implications. And I'll try to get my computer to stop flickering. We'll be discussing after lunch the first initiation, as DK offers it here in the rays and the initiations. He, you know, of course, he discusses it in many places, but there's a special discussion here, and that's what we will do. Okay, we'll see you about 5 minutes to 2, which is 5 minutes to 12, Universal Time, GMT, something of that nature.